All right, for the sense of hearing, we're going to split it up into two videos. So I'm going to first do hearing and sound, and then we're going to finish with equilibrium in part two. So basic structure of the ear, it is divided into, these are the main parts, and it's divided into three main areas of the ear. So it's divided into the outer ear, which is found here, the middle ear, and then the inner ear. And there's different names for the inner ear. It's also called the labyrinth, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So for the outer ear, it's also called the external ear. It includes the auricle or the pinna, and that's the outer part of the ear, the part of your ear that you can touch. And that's where our sound waves are collecting. They're shaped like this with a large lobe and an indent so that when sound waves come near us, they all collect in this area and are guided down this tube, which is called our external auditory meatus or canal. This tube is about 2.5 centimeters deep, but that also changes from person to person. And it terminates at the tympanic membrane, which is your eardrum. And that's found right here at the end of that canal. It passes through the temporal bone, so here's our temporal bone here of our skull. And it's also lined with hairs, so you've probably seen hairs in your ears. And the hairs guard the tube. Also in the skin of the canal are things called ceruminous glands, Ceruminous, and those ceruminous glands secrete wax, and that wax helps maintain or it helps prevent large foreign objects like bugs entering your ear. Depending on where you live, it's an evolutionary mutation that if you live in a hotter or area of the world near the equator, you produce more wax. And we can watch wax removal videos because they're awesome. So the next is the middle ear, and the middle ear is also called your tympanic cavity because it is where your tympanic membrane is found, and it's an air-filled space in the temporal bone. It's this space right here. It contains three small bones. Those are called your auditory ossicles. Remember, OSS means bones. They're called the malleus, also known as the hammer, the incus, also known as the anvil, and the stapes, also known as the stirrup. And these bridge the tympanic membrane of the eardrum and the inner ear. So they're connecting here and here, and we're going to talk about those muscles. And what they do is they transmit the vibration. So sound waves are vibrations. So they enter your ear, go through the auditory canal, vibrate the tympanic membrane, all of the bones vibrate, and that causes the fluid in the inner ear to then vibrate as well. So the stapes are connected to something called the oval window. It is right here. And when the stapes is vibrated, it vibrates the fluid found in the inner ear, and that stimulates our hearing receptors, which is then sending the impulse to our brain. The vibrations concentrate as they travel from the outer ear into the inner ear because the canal does get narrower, so it's concentrating those sound waves. And then also these three bones help to amplify the sound as well. So altogether, that's about 22 times greater than the sound simply that was on the tympanic membrane. So we're actually, inside our ears, we have amps. So this diagram is looking kind of from inside the head out. So here we have our eardrum, the blue is the tympanic membrane, and then here are those ossicles. So the muscles on the bones provide a means to dampen violent noise so that you don't damage your eardrum. And that's caused by the contraction of these muscles. So the muscles become rigid so that these three bones will not vibrate as much, and that protects your eardrum, and it also protects your hearing receptors. The muscles are involuntary movement. So there's the tensor tympani, and it connects to the malleus, to the auditory tube, which is going into your head. And when this contracts, it pulls on the malleus, making that rigid. And then the stapedius connects the stapes to the inside of the tympanic cavity. And like I said, these respond to loud external sounds, so it is a reflex. It's called the tympanic reflex. And the bones will become rigid so they aren't transferring those vibrations to your inner ear, protecting your hair receptors. So the tube here, it's called the auditory tube or the Eustachian tube. It connects your middle ear to your throat. And it's all to maintain pressure. So the area here in your meatus is directly connected to the outside, so we don't have to worry about pressure building up here. But in your inner and middle ear, pressure will build up. So what happens is when you change altitude, right here you have air from wherever you started. So if we're here in Granite Bay and we go up to Lake Tahoe, in our head on the way we have Granite Bay air and that air pressure. So what happens is as we go up in altitude, it always wants to go from high to low pressure. So it will push on the tympanic membrane, and that's causing you to not hear as well until your ears pop. And how you pop your ears is there are flaps located near the pharynx, and those need to open to release that pressured air. And it's induced by swallowing, yawning, or chewing. I can just do it. I don't know how I do it, but I guess I have control over that. But I can pop my ears whenever. And that helps maintain an equilibrium of pressure on both sides of the eardrum, the tympanic membrane. So here's like a nice larger diagram. So we have our external ear, our pinna, our auditory meatus of our outer ear. Here's our eardrum. This area right here is our middle ear with our 3 ossicles. And then here's the auditory tube connecting to our throat. And then this is going to be the inner ear. And here's the large nerve that is transferring stimuli from the inner ear to our brain. So the inner ear is composed of 3 parts: the cochlea, the semicircular canals, and the vestibule. The inner ear is very complex, and it's composed of chambers and tubes that all connect. And you can look here, this is just the inner ear. And it's called a labyrinth. And there's 2 labyrinths. There's the osseous labyrinth, which is the bony labyrinth, and that is canals in the temporal bone. And then there's the membranous labyrinth, which is membranous tubes within those canals in the temporal bone. In between the bony canal and the membranous labyrinth, there's perilymph, which is fluid. And then inside those membranous canals, these purple in the diagram tubes, there is endolymph. So here's kind of a cross section. We have our bony labyrinth with perilymph, and then we have our membranous labyrinth with endolymph. And those fluids are what's transferring vibrations from the outer ear to the inner ear. So the cochlea is this snail shell shaped organ. Semicircular canals are found here, and they help with equilibrium. And then the vestibule is right here, and it's a bony chamber in between the cochlea and semicircular canals, and it's what houses membranous structures, and it also helps with equilibrium, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. So here's kind of a general outline of how vibrations are transferred in the inner ear. So the stapes vibrates the oval window, that leads to the inner ear, that causes the vibrations in the basilar membrane, which we're going to talk about, which moves these hair cells. When the hair cells move, that causes a stimulation, which causes the neurons to reach action potential and send the impulse. So these are mechanoreceptors because they are responding to a mechanical movement, which is hairs in the cochlea moving. Here's a real cochlea, and you can see the oval window here. So the stapes will be connected here, cause vibrations, and that will be sent in this area, which is where the hair cells are found, the receptor cells. And then the round window aids to dampen noise over time so that the vibrations aren't continuously stuck here, so the sound waves have somewhere to exit. So the organ of Corti is found in the cochlea. So if you look here, we're looking at a cross section of this area here, and it's where all the hearing happens. So we have the organ of Corti, which is this entire structure, and it's where our hair cells are found. So the hair cells are seen here in blue. So the receptor cells are the hair cells. They're called stereocilia, and they extend into the endolymph, that fluid, and they're also connected to this tectoral membrane, which is connected to the other side of the cochlea, so there'll be kind of that top part of that tube up here, and it contacts the tips of those hairs. All the vibrations start at the basilar membrane. The basilar membrane will be stimulated to vibrate, and that will cause the hair cells to vibrate, which will then send the impulse. So different groups of receptor cells will bend in response to different frequencies. So there's groupings, they're typically in 4 rows, and different groups of the hair cells will have the vibration to cause them to bend, while the other hair cells aren't responding at all. So the bending of the hair cells stimulates ion channels to open. These are cells, not neurons, but they do have ion channels and they do release neurotransmitters, but they don't have an axon or a dendrite to receive or send an impulse. So when ion channels open, calcium floods in, and that calcium causes the neurotransmitters to be released. When the neurotransmitters are released, it stimulates nearby sensory nerve fibers, and then that will be depolarized and transmits the impulse along the cochlear branch, which is here. So the impulse will be sent from the hairs to the cochlear branch, and this is called the vestibulocochlear nerve, seen here, and then that takes this impulse directly to the brain. So here we have kind of the pathway that vibrations are sent through the endolymph, that fluid. So we'll have vibration here across the membrane, transmits to the fluid, causing here the basilar membrane to vibrate. This group of hair cells will vibrate, send the impulse to our vestibulocochlear nerve, and that will take us directly to the brain. Here is a general summary of the impulse, this path of the impulse, so I'd definitely read it over and make sure you understand the components involved. Here's also just kind of another summary of how sound is perceived by the human ear. So here it's showing our pathway. So here's our vestibulocochlear nerve coming from our ear. So it starts here, it does go through the medulla, and then it goes up through the midbrain, pons in the midbrain. After it's out of the brainstem, it will travel to the thalamus, found here, and then finally to the auditory cortices, where they will be interpreted. And this right here is found in your temporal lobe. Some nerve fibers do cross over. So you can see in this diagram, we have our vestibulocochlear nerve here. Some of them just go straight up on the same side they originated. Some of them are crossing over. And we also had some crossing over here. That causes impulses from each ear to be interpreted on both sides of the brain, which is positive because if you receive a blow to one side of your head, to that brain part, not the ear, if you leave the ear intact, you can still interpret hearing from that side of the ear if those important nerve pathways crossed over to the other side of the head, which is cool. All right, so in part 2, we're going to go over equilibrium and frequencies, and the lab will become much more clear to you after we've gone through this. But it was a discovery-based lab, so I wanted you guys to be able to test your hearing and see what's going on and then learn all the science behind it. All right, I will see you guys later today. It's actually first period right now. I'm late making this. All right, bye.